Hey friends, tonight we're stepping out of the crisp night air, the kind that makes your nose a little pink, and into a dimly lit, cluttered laboratory. Imagine the scent of sulfur, a hint of strange herbs, and that ever present, slightly metallic tang of, well, hopeful failure. You can almost hear the gentle bubbling of liquids in oddly shaped glass vessels and the soft scratch of a quill on parchment as someone hunched over a flickering candle tries to unlock the universe's biggest secrets. We're diving headfirst into the shimmering, often misunderstood world of alchemy, specifically chasing the elusive philosopher's stone. Now let's be honest, if you were actually an alchemist back in the day, mixing mercury with things you probably shouldn't even be touching, you probably wouldn't live long enough to see your Netflix queue. Modern safety standards were, shall we say, a distant dream. So before you get too comfortable and drift off into dreams of turning lead into gold, take a quick moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I'm doing here. It really does help the channel. And as always, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now turn off the lights, maybe switch on a fan for some gentle white noise, and let's begin our journey for tonight together. You find yourself standing on the threshold of this very laboratory. It's not the gleaming, sterile environment of a modern chemist. Oh no, this place is a chaotic symphony of the arcane and the mundane. Dust motes dance in the single shaft of moonlight piercing the gloom from a high, grimy window. Your eyes slowly adjust, and you see shelves overflowing with books, their leather bindings cracked with age, titles hinting at mysteries, Tabula Smaragdina, Corpus Hermeticum. Strange charts adorn the walls, depicting astrological alignments, planetary symbols, and cryptic diagrams that look like a toddler's attempt at circuit design. A stuffed crocodile hangs lopsidedly from the rafters, because why not? Every self-respecting alchemist, or natural philosopher, as they often preferred, needed a bit of exotic decor to set the mood. It was all part of the brand, really. You step further in, the floorboards creaking a soft complaint under your feet. The air is thick with the residue of countless experiments. You can pick out the sharp scent of vinegar, the sweetish smell of distilling herbs, and an underlying earthy aroma from a furnace, banked low but still radiating a gentle warmth. This furnace, the Athanor, is the heart of the alchemical workshop. It's designed to maintain precise temperatures for days, weeks, even months. Alchemists believed that the processes of nature were slow and gentle, and to replicate them, you needed patience and a really good, long-burning fire. Imagine trying to get a Kickstarter funded for an experiment that might take 40 years, and your main selling point is, I'm pretty sure I can cook this rock into gold, eventually. Good luck with that. The central quest, the one that keeps this imaginary alchemist and countless real ones burning the midnight oil and occasionally their eyebrows, is the creation of the Philosopher's Stone. This isn't just some shiny pebble. It's the magnum opus, the great work. It's reputed to have two primary jaw-dropping abilities, transmuting base metals like lead or mercury into pure gold, and brewing the elixir of life, a potion granting immortality, or at least a very, very long and healthy existence. So basically, it's the ultimate get-rich-quick scheme combined with a fountain of youth. No wonder people were obsessed. You notice a workbench cluttered with alembics, retorts, and crucibles. Some are gently simmering over small, flickering flames. One particularly odd looking vessel, a pelican shaped flask, is designed so that evaporating liquids condense and drip back into the main mixture, an early form of reflux condensation. It's a surprisingly sophisticated piece of glassware for its time. Mainstream historical fact: many of the distillation techniques and laboratory apparatus developed by alchemists, like the alembic and the water bath or bain marie, laid the foundational groundwork for modern chemistry. So while they were chasing what we now see as a magical fantasy, their meticulous experimentation and innovation in purifying and manipulating substances were very real and incredibly important. Now, amidst the serious looking equipment, you spot something a bit weirder. Tucked in a corner, there's a small, sealed jar containing what looks like a homunculus, a tiny, perfectly formed human figure. According to some alchemical texts, particularly those attributed to Paracelsus, a rather eccentric but influential 16th century alchemist, it was believed that a homunculus could be created through various, rather unsavory concoctions and processes, often involving human seed and a mare's womb or artificial heat. It's one of those details that makes you tilt your head and go, "Really? They actually wrote that down?" This particular little man is probably a clever bit of taxidermy or a wax model, but its presence speaks to the stranger fringes of alchemical belief, where the lines between science, magic, and wishful thinking became incredibly blurred. Historians still debate whether figures like Paracelsus genuinely believed in the literal creation of such beings, or if these were allegorical descriptions of deeper spiritual processes. The language of alchemy is notoriously symbolic, a veil designed to protect its secrets from the unworthy, or perhaps just to make it sound more impressive than mixing stuff in a shed. It's like trying to decipher an IKEA manual written by a poet who's had too much coffee. You drift away from the unsettling jar of the tiny, maybe not so real man, your attention drawn to a large open book on a lectern. The script is Latin, illuminated with intricate drawings of dragons devouring their own tails, the Ouroboros, a symbol of cycles, eternity, and the alchemical idea of prima materia, or first matter. This prima materia is another cornerstone of alchemical theory. It's believed to be the yuan shi, undifferentiated substance from which all other things in the universe are formed. The alchemists thought that if you could just break down a substance, any substance, back into this primordial goo, you could then coax it, guide it, transmute it into anything else you desired. Gold, of course, was the ultimate goal, seen as the most perfect and spiritually elevated metal. Lead, on the other hand, was considered base, corrupt, and metaphorically sick. So alchemy wasn't just about getting rich, it was about perfecting matter, and in doing so, perfecting the alchemist's own soul. It was a deeply spiritual pursuit, wrapped in a quasi-scientific package. Think of it as Marie Kondo for metals, but instead of asking if it sparks joy, you ask if it sparks gold. The pages of the book detail complex procedures involving specific sequences of heating, cooling, dissolving, and coagulating. Words like calcination, putrefaction, distillation, and sublimation appear frequently. These are the stages of the great work. One common allegorical representation of these stages involved colors: black, negredo, representing decomposition and spiritual death; white, albedo, purification, yellow, citrinitas, awakening, and finally red, rubedo, the achievement of the stone, perfection. It sounds rather like a cosmic mood ring, doesn't it? Oh dear, my experiment is in the black dog phase again. You notice a small pestle and mortar, stained with the residue of countless ground substances. Beside it lies a list, perhaps of ingredients: antimony, vitriol, cinnabar, sal ammoniac. Many of these materials, while common in alchemical recipes, were also quite toxic. Mercury and its compounds, for instance, were heavily used. Ingesting or inhaling mercury vapors can lead to severe neurological damage, which might explain some of the more imaginative theories and visions reported by alchemists. It's a mainstream historical fact that Isaac Newton, a towering figure of the scientific revolution, was also a devoted alchemist, spending countless hours in his laboratory. Analysis of his hair samples has shown significantly high levels of mercury, leading some to speculate that his later eccentricities might have been exacerbated by mercury poisoning. It's a sobering thought, one of history's greatest minds, slowly poisoning himself in pursuit of ancient wisdom. As you ponder this, your gaze falls upon a rather unusual object, a series of interconnected glass spheres, almost like a string of enormous, transparent beads suspended in a wooden frame. This is a philosophical tree, or sometimes called a Diana's tree, if it was made with silver. Alchemists would create these by dissolving a metal like silver in nitric acid and then introducing mercury or another reactive agent. The silver would then precipitate out of the solution, forming beautiful, branching, tree-like structures. While visually stunning and a testament to their understanding of chemical reactions, some alchemists attached deeper symbolic meaning to these metallic growths, seeing them as a physical manifestation of nature's creative power, a miniature representation of the growth of the stone itself. It's a weird, almost artistic sideline to the main quest, a bit like a baker getting really into competitive cake decorating when they're supposed to be perfecting sourdough. The sheer variety of texts and interpretations in alchemy is staggering. You might find one alchemist insisting that the prima materia is found in common dew collected at dawn, while another claims it's a specific type of ore, and a third argues it's something more metaphorical, like philosophical mercury, which isn't quite the mercury you find in a thermometer. This lack of standardization is one of the reasons alchemy remained so enigmatic. Historians still debate vigorously whether the entire alchemical tradition was primarily a practical, laboratory-based proto-chemistry aimed at literal transmutation, or if it was an allegorical system of spiritual development, using the language of chemical processes to describe inner transformation. Or perhaps most likely, it was a complex blend of both, with different practitioners emphasizing different aspects. Trying to pin down a single, unified, alchemical doctrine is like trying to nail jelly to a wall, a messy and ultimately frustrating endeavor. You just know someone somewhere probably tried to do that literally, for science, or rather for alchemy. The silence of the laboratory is broken only by the faint hiss of a flame and the gentle drip, drip, drip of liquid from a condenser. You can feel the weight of centuries of hope, of tireless effort, of dreams whispered into the smoky air of rooms just like this one, all focused on that one singular transformative goal. The Philosopher's Stone, You turn from the metallic tree, your gaze sweeping over the crowded room once more. It's a place of intense focus, a testament to a singular, all consuming passion. But it's also a place of profound secrecy. Alchemy wasn't always a pursuit smiled upon by the authorities. Depending on the era and location, alchemists could be viewed with suspicion, accused of fraud, witchcraft, or even counterfeiting if they claimed to make gold. This led to a tradition of coded language and veiled symbolism, not just to protect sacred knowledge from the vulgar or uninitiated, but also to protect the alchemists themselves from imprisonment or worse. It's a mainstream historical fact that some rulers did employ alchemists, hoping to bolster their treasuries, while others persecuted them. Pope John the 22nd even issued a decree in 1317 against alchemical counterfeiting, which cast a long shadow of suspicion over legitimate practitioners. So the cryptic texts weren't just intellectual flexing, they were a genuine job hazard mitigation strategy. Imagine trying to explain your complex chemical theories to a skeptical medieval guard. No, really, this bubbling green stuff isn't poison. It's just, philosophical. This need for secrecy, however, also fostered a vibrant exchange of hidden knowledge through manuscripts and personal networks that spanned across Europe and the Middle East. The roots of European alchemy, for instance, are deeply intertwined with Greco-Egyptian traditions, particularly from Hellenistic Alexandria, and significantly influenced by Islamic scholars during the Golden Age of Islam. Figures like Jabir ibn Hayyan, often Latinized as Geber, in the 8th century were monumental. Geber is credited with introducing a more experimental, quantitative approach to alchemy, emphasizing systematic experimentation and the recording of results. He proposed that metals were formed from mercury and sulfur in different proportions and purities, a core theory that persisted for centuries. Now, for a truly weird detail, among the more obscure ingredients whispered about in alchemical circles was something called Alchemist, or the universal solvent. This was a hypothetical substance that could dissolve any other substance, including gold. The tricky bit, of course, which alchemists seem to conveniently gloss over, was what kind of container you would keep this universal solvent in if it dissolved everything. It's a paradox that would make a great philosopher's sickle, philosopher's problem such as riddle. Perhaps it was meant to be purely theoretical, a thought experiment, or maybe someone out there was genuinely trying to find a non-dissolvable bottle. You can picture the alchemist. Eureka! I've invented the Alchemist. Oh, wait. Sound of a dissolving workbench. The true nature and ambitions of these alchemists remain a topic of rich, scholarly debate. Were they primarily mystics on a spiritual journey, using chemical metaphors for transformation of the self? Or were they genuine proto-scientists, fumbling their way towards empirical chemistry through trial and error, with the gold-making as a literal, if unrealized, ambition? Many scholars now argue that it's an unhelpful dichotomy. For many practitioners, these aspects were inseparable. The purification of metals was seen as analogous to the purification of the soul, and the laboratory work was a form of active meditation or prayer. They believed that to succeed in the great work, the alchemist had to be morally and spiritually pure. This idea of the alchemist's own virtue being a critical ingredient is quite unique. It's not like your oven cares if you've been kind to your neighbor before you try to bake a cake. As you stand in this quiet, shadowed space, you get a sense of the immense intellectual and spiritual effort poured into these endeavors. The dreams of the philosopher's stone were not just about wealth or eternal life in a purely material sense. They were about understanding the fundamental nature of reality, achieving a kind of perfection, and perhaps even a gnosis, a direct intuitive understanding of the divine. It was a quest that blurred the lines between science, philosophy, and religion, a holistic worldview that we, in our highly specialized age, can find difficult to fully grasp. The flickering candlelight seems to illuminate not just the room, but a whole lost way of thinking, a world where the material and the spiritual were two sides of the same golden coin they so desperately sought to create. And that, for now, is the heart of the Alchemist's workshop, the antechamber to the dream of the philosopher's stone. You've seen the tools, inhaled the unique atmosphere, and glimpsed the mindset of those who devoted their lives to this enigmatic art. The stage is set. All right, you've had a good look around the Alchemist's lab, the kind of place where brilliant ideas and slightly singed beards were made. Now let's move beyond the bubbling concoctions and the dusty tomes for a moment, and really try to get inside the idea of the philosopher's stone. What did these ancient seekers truly believe they were looking for? Because it wasn't just a magical rock they hoped to stumble upon, like finding a rare Pokemon in the wild. The stone was something to be made, a culmination of art, science, and no small amount of esoteric Jenga. You settle into a slightly less rickety chair in the corner of that imaginary laboratory, the scent of old parchment and strange chemicals still hanging in the air. The stone, in its most idealized form, wasn't necessarily a stone in the way you'd skip one across a pond. Its described appearance varied wildly in alchemical texts, sometimes a red powder, sometimes a waxy resin, other times a heavy, fusible glass-like substance, or even a divine, radiant crystal. The color red or deep ruby is the most consistently cited for the perfected stone, symbolizing its fiery, potent nature. This Red King, as it was sometimes poetically called, was the ultimate catalyst. The theory, in very broad strokes, was that this stone, when created, possessed the power to perfect anything it touched. For metals, this meant elevating them to the noble state of gold. A tiny pinch of this red powder, projected onto molten lead or mercury, was said to be enough to transmute the entire mass into pure, gleaming gold. Imagine the anxiety of that final step. You've spent years, maybe decades, on this project, and now you're about to sprinkle your mystery dust onto a pot of boiling metal. No pressure. You'd probably want a very long pair of tongs and a good blast shield. One mainstream historical fact is the enduring legacy of a text known as the Emerald Tablet or Tabula Smaragdina, attributed to the legendary Hermes Trismegistus, a syncretic figure combining the Greek god Hermes and the Egyptian god Thoth. This short, cryptic text was considered by European alchemists to be a foundational document, containing the secrets of the prima materia and the great work. Its famous opening line, "That which is below corresponds to that which is above, and that which is above corresponds to that which is below, to accomplish the miracles of the one thing," became a cornerstone of alchemical philosophy, suggesting a correspondence between the macrocosm, the universe, and the microcosm, humanity and earthly processes. It's essentially the philosophical underpinning for as above, so below, which you still hear in various esoteric circles today. It's the ancient world's way of saying, hey, the universe is basically a giant selfie. Now, let's delve into a weirder aspect of the stone's lore, its supposed connection to light. Some alchemical traditions describe the perfected stone not just as a transmuting agent or a source of the elixir of life, but as a literal source of inexhaustible light, a kind of divine lamp. There are tales, likely apocryphal, of tombs of ancient sages being opened to reveal bodies perfectly preserved, illuminated by an ever-burning lamp powered by something akin to the stone. It's a wonderfully romantic and mystical image, this eternal, self-sustaining light. Of course, how one would go about creating a light-emitting rock using sulfur, mercury, and a lot of patient heating is conveniently left out of most recipes. It's one of those details that makes you wonder if someone just saw a really impressive firefly one night and got a bit carried away with their note-taking. Item number 37 for the stone must glow, preferably with a dimmer switch. The very nature of the stone's powers is a subject of ongoing scholarly debate. While the transmutation of metals and the elixir of life are the headline acts, some historians and scholars of esotericism argue that these should be interpreted primarily as allegories for spiritual transformation and enlightenment. In this view, turning lead, the base, ignorant soul, into gold, so the illuminated, perfected spirit, was the true aim. The laboratory work then becomes a physical discipline, a meditative practice to aid this inner journey. Others maintain that many, if not most, alchemists were indeed pursuing literal, physical transmutation and longevity. They point to the detailed, practical laboratory instructions and the very real chemical discoveries made along the way as evidence of a hands-on material pursuit. The truth, as is often the case, is probably somewhere in the messy middle. Perhaps the alchemists themselves didn't always neatly separate the spiritual from the material. The perfection of one was intertwined with the perfection of the other. It's like arguing whether baking a perfect cake is about the joy of the process or the deliciousness of the eating. Why can't it be both? Trying to strictly categorize their motives is like trying to sort socks in the dark. You might get a few pairs right, but mostly you're just fumbling. So you're nestled in that imaginary chair, contemplating the Red King and its rather ambitious resume of powers. The next big question that hangs in the smoky air is, how exactly did one go about making this marvel? It wasn't a weekend DIY project, that's for sure. The great work, or magnum opus, was often described as a lengthy, arduous process, sometimes said to take months, years, or even a lifetime. Patience wasn't just a virtue for the alchemist, it was a fundamental job requirement, right up there with a high tolerance for strange smells and a distinct lack of concern about lab safety. The process typically began with the selection and purification of the prima materia, that elusive first matter. As we touched on, what this prima materia actually was varied wildly depending on which alchemist you asked. Some said it was common, dew, earth, even garbage. Talk about a budget-friendly startup. While others believed it to be a specific mineral or metal, often mercury or antimony, which had to be philosophically prepared. This preparation often involved stages with evocative names: calcination, breaking down by fire, dissolution, dissolving in a solvent, separation, isolating the desired elements, conjunction, recombining purified elements, putrefaction, a stage of decay or blackening, the negrito we mentioned seen as essential for rebirth, coagulation, solidifying the purified substance, and finally, exaltation, the perfection into the stone. Each stage could take an agonizingly long time, requiring precise control of heat from the athanor, that ever-burning furnace. Imagine watching a pot that literally never boils for months on end. It's the ultimate test of whether you really want that gold, or if you'd rather just, take up knitting. A mainstream historical fact is that despite the secrecy, alchemical knowledge did spread, often through hand-copied manuscripts that were susceptible to errors, embellishments, or deliberate obfuscation. This transmission of knowledge was a complex web. For example, the works of Islamic alchemists like Al-Razi, Razis, and the aforementioned Jabir ibn Hayyan, Geber, were translated into Latin from the 12th century onwards, profoundly influencing European alchemy. These texts brought not only theories about transmutation, but also practical descriptions of laboratory equipment and chemical processes like distillation, crystallization, and sublimation, forming a crucial bridge of knowledge from the ancient world through the Islamic Golden Age to medieval and Renaissance Europe. It's like an ancient game of telephone, but with incredibly complex chemical recipes instead of simple phrases, and the end result might either be profound wisdom or a recipe for accidentally blowing up your shed. Now, for a peculiar detail related to the process, some alchemical traditions emphasized the importance of using living or philosophical mercury and sulfur, not just the common mundane versions. This philosophical mercury, for instance, wasn't simply the quicksilver you'd find in a mine. It was a hypothesized, idealized form of mercury, often described as being extracted from metals themselves or prepared through complex processes. There are even recipes that involve things like dew collected from Especifico plants under a full moon, or using the first menstrual blood of a virgin. Yes, you heard that right. These kinds of ingredients push the boundaries from early chemistry into something that feels much more like ritual magic or folk medicine. It's this blending of the ostensibly rational with the deeply symbolic and sometimes frankly bizarre that makes alchemy so fascinating and at times a bit unsettling. You can just imagine the alchemist nervously explaining to the medieval equivalent of a health inspector, no, it's philosophical menstrual blood, totally different. The historical accounts of successful transmutations are, as you might expect, hotly debated by scholars. There are numerous anecdotal stories. For instance, the 17th century scientist Robert Boyle, a key figure in the history of chemistry, Boyle's Law, anyone, was deeply interested in alchemy and recorded accounts of supposed transmutations. One famous story involves a mysterious stranger who allegedly gave a small amount of the stone to the philosopher Helvetius in 1666, who then successfully transmuted lead into gold. Helvetius published an account of this, and it became a widely cited case. Were these accounts genuine, elaborate hoaxes, or perhaps misinterpretations of chemical reactions that produced gold-like substances? Scholars still argue whether any alchemist ever truly achieved literal transmutation as described. Some suggest that any gold produced was likely either pre-existing gold cleverly introduced, an alloy that merely resembled gold, or the result of a misunderstanding of a chemical process. Others, leaning more into the esoteric, might not rule out the possibility entirely, especially if the stone is considered a product of forces not yet understood by modern science. It's a classic historical whodunit, or rather, whodititan howdunit. Trying to verify these centuries-old claims is like trying to prove someone really did catch that enormous fish they told you about. The evidence tends to be a bit slippery. The alchemist, you see, wasn't just a chemist, they were also an artist, a philosopher, and a detective, trying to coax nature into revealing her deepest secrets, one slow, carefully heated crucible at a time. All right, so you're still in that cozy, if slightly fume-filled imaginary laboratory. We've talked a lot about turning lead into gold, which, let's face it, has a certain undeniable bling appeal. But the philosopher's stone had another, arguably even more profound, promise up its metaphorical sleeve, the elixir of life. If gold was about perfecting matter, the elixir was about perfecting life itself, offering not just extended youth and health, but potentially even a form of immortality. Suddenly, worrying about your retirement fund seems rather quaint, doesn't it? The elixir was often conceived of as being derived from the philosopher's stone itself. Sometimes it was described as the stone dissolved in wine or another special solvent, creating a potable gold or a ruby red liquid that, when ingested, would rejuvenate the body, cure all diseases, and prolong life indefinitely. Imagine a sip of this mystical brew, wrinkles vanishing, energy returning, all your aches and pains just gone. It's the ultimate cosmic health smoothie. The accounts often describe it as not just extending life, but restoring youth and vigor, making it incredibly alluring. Who wouldn't want to feel perpetually 25, but with the wisdom of centuries? Though you'd probably get tired of explaining all the historical inaccuracies in period dramas after a while. Actually, their hats were not that pointy in the 14th century. The quest for longevity potions and elixirs of immortality is a mainstream historical fact that wasn't limited to European alchemy. Indeed, it's a recurring theme across many cultures and throughout history. Ancient Chinese emperors, for instance, were famously obsessed with finding or creating elixirs of immortality. Taoist alchemists in China developed their own complex systems, often involving minerals like cinnabar, mercury sulfide, and jade, as well as herbal remedies and specific meditative and physical exercises, all aimed at achieving longevity or even becoming a Xian, an immortal being. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, dispatched vast expeditions in search of the legendary Penglai Mountain and the elixir, and tragically, many of these Chinese elixirs, particularly those containing mercury, arsenic, and other heavy metals, likely had the opposite effect, shortening the lives of those who consumed them in their quest for eternal life. It's a rather dark irony, dying in pursuit of not dying. Now, for a weird detail concerning the pursuit of extended life or a universal cure, let's consider some of the more adventurous ingredients proposed over the centuries, sometimes overlapping with alchemical thought. Beyond the relatively tame, if toxic, minerals, you find recipes in historical pharmacopoeias and folk traditions calling for things like powdered mummy. Yes, actual Egyptian mummies were ground up and sold as medicine for centuries, a practice called mumia, viper's flesh, crab's eyes, or even dragon's blood, which was usually the resin of certain trees, thankfully. While not always directly tied to the elixir of life from the philosopher's stone, these illustrate the often desperate and imaginative lengths people would go to for health and longevity. It makes you appreciate modern medicine, where the weirdest ingredient you're likely to encounter is a long, unpronounceable chemical name, rather than, powdered grave goods. Take 2 spoonfuls of ancient curse and call me in the morning. The relationship between the 2 primary goals of the philosopher's stone, gold and eternal life, is a fascinating area of scholarly discussion. Were they always seen as a package deal, or did some alchemists prioritize one over the other? Did the desire for wealth overshadow the quest for spiritual enlightenment and physical perfection, or vice versa? Some historians argue that the transmutation of metals was, for some, a more practical, demonstrable proof of the alchemist's art, perhaps even a way to fund the longer, more esoteric work of creating the elixir. Others suggest that the elixir was always the ultimate prize, as what good is infinite gold if you're not around long enough to enjoy it? Or perhaps, more philosophically, they were inextricably linked. The perfection of matter, gold, was a necessary step or a parallel process to the perfection of life, the elixir. The stone, in this view, represented a universal medicine, capable of curing the sickness of base metals and the sickness of the human body, bringing both to their most perfect, incorruptible state. It's like a cosmic 2-for-1 deal. Solve your financial woes and your mortality problem with one slightly radioactive-looking pebble. The alchemists certainly weren't accused of dreaming small, were they? You have to admire their ambition, even if their methods were sometimes, shall we say, a touch optimistic. So you're still with me in this imaginary alchemist's den, the air thick with the ghosts of ambitions, both golden and life-extending. We've touched upon the dazzling promises of the philosopher's stone, mountains of gold, endless youth. But what was life actually like for the alchemists themselves, and how did the world around them view these often secretive practitioners? It wasn't all quiet contemplation and bubbling retorts. The pursuit of alchemy was a high-stakes game, attracting not only dedicated philosopher-scientists, but also a fascinating rogues gallery of charlatans, con artists, and overly enthusiastic patrons. You can imagine the scene. A nobleman, perhaps a bit desperate to refill his coffers after one too many lavish parties or ill-advised wars, hears whispers of someone who can turn lead into gold. The temptation would be immense. This created a ready market for alchemists, or at least for those who could talk a good game. For every supposedly genuine adept toiling away in quiet devotion, there were likely several puffers, a rather unflattering contemporary term for fraudulent alchemists who used bellows to make their furnaces roar impressively, but produced little more than smoke, empty promises, and occasionally a cleverly disguised nugget of pre-existing gold discovered in the crucible at just the right moment. It was the medieval equivalent of those make money fast internet pop-ups, only with more sulfur involved. Invest in my secret lead to gold scheme, limited time offer. Side effects may include explosions and disappointment. A mainstream historical fact is the fascinating and often fraught relationship between alchemists and powerful patrons. Rulers like Emperor Rudolph II of Prague in the late 16th and early 17th centuries were famously obsessed with alchemy and the occult, turning Prague into a veritable hub for alchemists, astronomers, and mystics from all over Europe. He supported figures like Edward Kelly, who worked with the more famous John Dee. While some patrons were genuinely interested in the philosophical and scientific aspects, many were simply after the gold or the elixir. This patronage could be a double-edged sword, providing resources and protection on one hand, but also leading to intense pressure to produce results. Failure to deliver could, and sometimes did, lead to imprisonment or even execution. Imagine your performance review hinging on whether or not you've managed to violate the known laws of physics that week. Stressful. Now, for a peculiar detail, amidst the rampant fraud, there were various supposed tests or signs to distinguish a true philosopher's stone or a genuine adept. One such belief was that true alchemical gold, made from the stone, was different from ordinary gold. It was said to be more living or medicinal, and some texts claim that it could be used to make a potent medicine, or that seeds soaked in a solution of it would sprout much faster. Another rather charmingly naive idea was that a true alchemist would be uninterested in material wealth for its own sake, living a humble life, and would only use their knowledge for good. Of course, this didn't stop countless humble figures from promising riches to anyone who'd listen. It's like saying a true magician would never do card tricks for money. A nice ideal, but the rent is still due. One of the more esoteric tests for the stone itself was its projection. The idea that an infinitesimally small amount of the stone could transmute a vastly larger quantity of base metal. If your stone required you to use a pound of it to make a pound of gold, you were probably doing it wrong, or you just had a very expensive reddish rock. The overall legacy and contribution of alchemy is a significant point of scholarly debate. Was it ultimately a grand, mystical delusion, a scientific dead end that distracted brilliant minds for centuries with impossible dreams? Or was it a crucial, if messy, proto-science, a dung heap, as some historians have colorfully put it, from which the flower of modern chemistry eventually bloomed? There's evidence for both sides. Certainly, the core goal of transmuting lead into gold via the philosopher's stone is not something modern science recognizes as possible in the way alchemists conceived it, though nuclear physicists can technically change one element into another. It's a tad more complex and less cost-effective than mining. However, in their relentless pursuit, alchemists developed and refined many laboratory techniques like distillation, sublimation, and crystallization. They meticulously observed chemical reactions, discovered and characterized new substances like antimony, arsenic, and phosphorus, and laid much of the groundwork for a more empirical approach to understanding matter. It's a bit like a group of explorers setting out to find Atlantis, and while they never find the mythical city, they end up meticulously mapping previously uncharted coastlines and discovering new islands along the way. The original quest might have been fantastical, but the journey itself yielded real, tangible discoveries. And so, the figure of the alchemist remains complex, part mystic, part scientist, part philosopher, and sometimes part showman. They walked a fine line between the known and the unknown, driven by a dream of ultimate transformation, a dream that fueled both profound insights and occasionally spectacular failures. The laboratory, with its strange glows and stranger smells, was their stage, and the philosopher's stone, their elusive, glittering prize. All right, you've navigated the hopeful highs and the often fraudulent lows of the alchemist's world. You've pondered the allure of endless gold and timeless life. Now, as the imaginary candlelight in our shared laboratory begins to flicker a little lower, we approach a new dawn, one that would gradually cast the ancient art of alchemy into the shadows, or at least into a different kind of light. The world was changing, and the quest for the philosopher's stone, as it had been known for centuries, was about to face its toughest critic, the burgeoning discipline of modern science. You feel a subtle shift in the atmosphere of our alchemical den. The air, still tinged with sulfur and mystery, now carries a faint, almost imperceptible scent of something new, perhaps the crisp, clean aroma of rigorous methodology. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the way learned people approached the study of the natural world began to transform significantly. Thinkers like Francis Bacon championed a new empirical method, emphasizing observation, experimentation, and the systematic collection of data. The old reliance on ancient authorities and mystical revelation started to give way to a demand for reproducible results and theories that could be tested and proven or disproven. This was not great news for an art as shrouded in allegory and individual interpretation as alchemy. It's hard to peer review a recipe that includes the tear of a grieving unicorn or a whisper of dragon's breath. Your colleagues might have a few, shall we say, methodological questions. One of the key mainstream historical facts marking this transition is the work of Robert Boyle, often hailed as one of the fathers of modern chemistry. In his 1661 book, The Skeptical Chemist, Boyle challenged the traditional alchemical theories of elements, like the Aristotelian earth, air, fire, water, or the alchemical principles of salt, sulfur, and mercury. He argued for a more corpuscular view of matter, made up of tiny particles, and emphasized the importance of empirical chemical analysis. While Boyle himself, as we've noted, was deeply interested in alchemy and even believed transmutation might be possible, his insistence on rigorous experimentation and clear, unambiguous language helped pave the way for chemistry to emerge as a distinct scientific discipline. It's like he was trying to get the alchemists to use a shared Google Doc for their recipes instead of just scribbling cryptic notes on old napkins. Much more efficient, but perhaps less romantic. Even as this new scientific rigor began to take hold, some alchemical practitioners clung to the old ways, sometimes with a fervor that bordered on the bizarre. For a weird detail from this later period, consider the persistence of iatrochemistry, a branch of alchemy heavily influenced by Paracelsus, which focused on creating medicines. While it led to some useful mineral-based remedies, it also perpetuated some truly strange ideas. For instance, the doctrine of signatures held that God had marked plants and minerals with a sign or signature indicating their medicinal uses. So a plant with heart-shaped leaves might be good for the heart, or a yellow flower for jaundice. It's a lovely poetic idea, but as a basis for medicine, it's a bit like choosing your dinner based on which food items most resemble your internal organs. This walnut looks like a tiny brain, must be good for my thinking. While not exclusive to late-stage alchemy, Its persistence in the face of more empirical approaches highlights the enduring appeal of symbolic thinking. The fate of alchemy itself is a subject of interesting scholarly debate. Did alchemy simply die out, replaced by the more rational and effective science of chemistry? Or did it merely retreat from the laboratory and transform, its more spiritual and philosophical aspects continuing in other currents of thought? Some scholars argue that while operative alchemy, the physical attempt to transmute metals or create the elixir, largely faded with the rise of chemistry, speculative or spiritual alchemy endured. Its symbolism and ideas about transformation were absorbed into various esoteric traditions, secret societies like Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism, and later into psychological theories, most notably with Carl Jung, who saw alchemical symbolism as representing the process of individuation. So perhaps the philosopher's stone wasn't so much lost as rebranded. Instead of a physical stone, it became a metaphor for achieving enlightenment or psychological wholeness. It's certainly a less messy pursuit. No more exploding crucibles, just the occasional exploding psyche. You can sense the old alchemist in our imaginary lab, looking a bit bewildered by these new developments. His world of mystical correspondences and divinely inspired processes is being challenged by a colder, more precise way of understanding the universe. The very language is changing, from the poetic allusions of the emerald tablet to the precise formulas of chemical equations. The quest for gold was slowly being replaced by the quest for knowledge for its own sake, or at least for more reliably achievable industrial and medical applications. Though Athenor's fire, which burned so patiently for centuries, was beginning to dim, at least in the literal sense, so you're still here, in this fading echo of an alchemist's workshop. The shadows are growing longer, and the once vibrant dreams of turning lead into gold and brewing elixirs of eternal youth seem to be receding, like mist in the morning sun of a new scientific age. Yet the story of the philosopher's stone doesn't just abruptly end with a slammed laboratory door. Its legacy is far more subtle and in some ways just as enduring as the immortality it promised. As the 18th century progressed into the 19th, chemistry, under figures like Antoine Lavoisier, who established the law of conservation of mass and helped systematize chemical nomenclature, truly came into its own. Lavoisier's work, which emphasized quantitative measurement and a clear distinction between elements and compounds, effectively dismantled the theoretical foundations upon which classical alchemy had been built. It's a mainstream historical fact that by the late 18th century, alchemy had largely lost its credibility within the scientific community. The great encyclopedias of the Enlightenment period often dismissed it as a foolish or fraudulent pursuit. The quest for the stone was relegated to the fringes, a romantic but ultimately misguided chapter in the history of human thought. The alchemist's dusty laboratory, once a place of cutting-edge, if esoteric research, was becoming a historical curiosity, a bit like looking at an old 8-track player and wondering how anyone ever thought it was a good idea. But the dream itself? That's harder to extinguish. The desires that fueled the quest for the philosopher's stone, for wealth beyond measure, for a life unburdened by sickness and decay, for a profound understanding of the universe's secrets, these are timeless human aspirations. They didn't disappear just because the periodic table became a thing. They simply found new avenues of expression. We still chase elixirs in the form of anti-aging creams and miracle diets. We still seek to transmute base materials into something more valuable, whether it's silicon into computer chips or data into profit. The alchemist's furnace may have cooled, but the human drive to transform, to perfect, and to understand burns as brightly as ever. Perhaps it's just that our modern Athenors are now cyclotrons or stock market algorithms. The tools change, but the underlying itch often remains. Now, for one last, lingering weird detail from the persistent shadow of alchemy. Even into the 20th and 21st centuries, you'll find occasional, often eccentric, claims of individuals having rediscovered alchemical secrets or even possessing the philosopher's stone. These claims usually exist far outside mainstream science, often in esoteric communities or as part of complex New Age philosophies. For instance, the figure of Fulcanelli, a mysterious French alchemist purported to have successfully created the stone in the early 20th century, remains a legend in occult circles, though his identity and actual existence are shrouded in mystery and debate. It's a testament to the stone's enduring power as a symbol that people still want to believe in that ultimate transformative substance, that key to unlocking all mysteries. It's like hearing someone claim they've found a working DeLorean. Part of you scoffs, but another tiny, hopeful part whispers, "What if?" This brings us to a final, overarching scholarly debate. What is the ultimate cultural and psychological significance of the philosopher's stone myth? Why does this idea, born from ancient metallurgical practices and mystical philosophy, continue to resonate even in our hyper-scientific age? Is it simply a fascinating historical curiosity? Or does the stone represent something deeper in the human psyche, a potent symbol of transformation, the yearning for perfection, the desire to reconcile spirit and matter, or the hope of transcending our ordinary limitations? Scholars of myth, literature, and psychology continue to explore these questions. The stone has appeared in countless stories, from medieval romances to modern fantasy novels and video games, often representing ultimate power, wisdom, or the key to solving some great crisis. Its enduring appeal suggests it taps into fundamental human narratives about quests, hidden knowledge, and the potential for extraordinary change. It's a symbol that can be endlessly reinterpreted, holding a different facet of meaning for each generation that encounters it. As the last wisps of imaginary smoke curl towards the rafters of our shared alchemical space, you can almost feel a sense of peace descend. The frantic striving, the desperate hope, the fear of failure and persecution, these have faded. What remains is the quiet dignity of a pursuit that, for all its missteps and fantastical claims, represented a profound human engagement with the mysteries of the universe. The alchemists looked at the world around them, at dull lead and gleaming gold, at sickness and health, at life and death, and dared to imagine that it could all be transformed, perfected. They may not have found the physical stone they sought, but in their tireless quest, they helped lay the groundwork for a new understanding of the world, and perhaps a deeper understanding of the enduring human drive to reach beyond our grasp. The stone itself may remain a dream, but the journey it inspired has undeniably changed the world, leaving behind a legacy of discovery, a rich tapestry of symbolism, and a faint, lingering scent of sulfur and stardust. And with that, our exploration of the alchemist's dream and the elusive philosopher's stone draws to a close. You've peered into the heart of their laboratories, wrestled with their cryptic theories, and perhaps even felt a flicker of that ancient, burning desire for transformation. Now it's time to let these thoughts settle, to allow the images of bubbling concoctions and dusty tomes to gently fade. And so, as the echoes of the alchemist's workshop gently recede into the quiet corridors of your mind, allow yourself to feel a sense of profound calm settling over you. Let the intricate details of arcane symbols and strange bubbling liquids begin to soften and blur like watercolors bleeding into a damp page, losing their sharp edges and becoming indistinct, peaceful forms. The weight of history, the centuries of earnest searching and fervent dreams, can now become a soft, comforting blanket, tucking you in. There's no need to ponder the mysteries of the prima materia any longer, no need to decipher cryptic texts or worry about the precise temperature of the Athenor's flame. All that striving, all that effort, belongs to a time long past, and you can release it now, letting it drift away like smoke from a snuffed-out candle, leaving only a sense of quiet completion in the air. Feel your own body growing heavier, more relaxed, sinking deeper into the surface beneath you. Each breath you take can be a little slower, a little deeper, carrying away any lingering tension, any last vestiges of the day's concerns. The laboratory, with its myriad of curious objects, fades further and further until it's just a distant, shimmering point of light, and then even that gentle glow softens into a velvety darkness. There is only the stillness of this moment, the gentle rhythm of your own breathing, and the quiet invitation of sleep. Allow your thoughts to become like clouds, drifting lazily across a vast, peaceful sky with no particular destination, no urgency, just a slow, serene passage. You are safe, you are comfortable, and all is well. The alchemist's dream has dissolved into the peaceful landscape of your own approaching slumber. Hey friends, tonight we are gently pushing open a creaky, ancient door, not into a dusty alchemist lab this time, but into the hushed, reverent atmosphere of a rare book library. Imagine the scent of old vellum, a whisper of dry ink, and the almost palpable silence that surrounds objects of great mystery. You can almost feel the weight of unanswered questions in the air as you approach a glass case, and inside, nestled on velvet, is a small, unassuming, yet utterly baffling manuscript. We are about to get lost in the enigmatic pages of the Voynich manuscript, a book written in a script no one can read, filled with illustrations of plants that don't exist, and cosmic charts that defy easy explanation. Now let's be frank, if you were given this book in, say, the 15th century and told to figure it out, you'd probably end up convinced it was either divinely inspired or you were just really bad at languages. Modern cryptographers with supercomputers haven't cracked it, so your chances with a quill and candlelight were, let's say, slim to none. You'd likely just use it as a very confusing paperweight. So before you get too comfortable and drift off into dreams of undecipherable texts, take a quick moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I'm doing here. It really does help the channel. And as always, I'd love to know where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's always fascinating to see how far these stories travel. Now turn off the lights, maybe switch on a fan for some gentle white noise, and let's begin our journey for tonight together. You find yourself standing before this very manuscript, now housed in Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library. It's not a grand, imposing tome. It's rather modest in size, about 23.5 by 16.2 centimeters. That's roughly 9 by 6 inches, and maybe 5 centimeters thick. Its wooden covers are gone, replaced centuries ago by a plain vellum binding, giving it a rather humble, almost vulnerable appearance. But don't let its unassuming exterior fool you. Within these pages lies one of history's most perplexing and enduring enigmas. As you lean closer, metaphorically, of course, we wouldn't want to breathe on the priceless artifact. You'd see page after page of flowing, elegant script. The characters are unlike any known language. Some look a bit like Latin letters, others like numbers, and some are just strange, graceful loops and flourishes, gallows-like characters, and symbols that seem tantalizingly familiar, yet utterly alien. It's as if someone took the concept of writing and decided to give it a complete, whimsical makeover. The manuscript is made of calfskin vellum, and the ink is a metallic iron gall ink, typical of the period. The text flows from left to right, with a slightly uneven right margin, much like handwritten documents of its time. But what truly captures your attention, alongside the unreadable script, are the illustrations. Drawn in colored inks, shades of green, blue, red, brown, and yellow, they are as baffling as the text they accompany. There are sections depicting fantastical plants that no botanist has ever identified, their leaves, roots, and flowers unlike anything in the known botanical world. Some look like a child's imaginative drawing of a flower. Others are intricate and complex, yet stubbornly unclassifiable. Imagine trying to make a salad with one of those. Is this space broccoli or an angry artichoke? You'd probably stick to carrots. A mainstream historical fact about the manuscript is its modern rediscovery. It gets its name from Wilfrid Voynich, a Polish-American antiquarian book dealer who claimed to have acquired it in 1912 from the Villa Mondragone, a Jesuit college near Rome. Voynich was a fascinating character himself, a former revolutionary who became a respected, if somewhat romantic figure in the rare book world. He was immediately captivated by the manuscript's mystery and dedicated much of his life to unlocking its secrets and tracing its provenance, though he ultimately failed to decipher it. The story of its journey before Voynich is shadowy, pieced together from letters and educated guesses, which we'll delve into. Now for a weird, or at least intriguing detail right from the physical object itself. Scattered throughout the manuscript are several large, multi-page foldouts. One of the most famous is a circular diagram in the astronomical or astrological section, often dubbed the Rosette foldout. It's a stunning, complex drawing with 9 interconnected circular medallions filled with more strange symbols, what look like tiny castles or towers, and possibly representations of celestial bodies, or even microscopic organisms, depending on who you ask. When you unfold it, it's like a miniature enigmatic map of, well, that's the question, isn't it? A map of a lost world, a spiritual journey, or just a really elaborate doodle by someone with a lot of time on their hands and access to some very nice vellum. It's the kind of thing that makes you wish for a behind-the-scenes documentary from the 15th century. The origin and purpose of the Voynich manuscript are naturally subjects of intense scholarly debate. Radiocarbon dating of the vellum, conducted in 2009 at the University of Arizona, placed its creation somewhere between 1404 and 1438 with 95% confidence. This was a major breakthrough, as it firmly anchored the manuscript in the early 15th century, dispelling earlier theories that it might be a later hoax by Voynich himself or someone like the 16th century occultist John Dee. However, knowing when it was made hasn't brought us much closer to knowing why or by whom. Was it an herbal manual, an alchemical text, a treatise on astrology or astronomy, a coded message, an encyclopedia of a lost world, or perhaps the elaborate creation of a solitary, imaginative mind? Or could it be a sophisticated hoax created in the 15th century to defraud a wealthy patron interested in arcane knowledge? The arguments for each theory are passionate and often highly technical, involving linguistic analysis, comparisons of artistic styles, and historical contextualization. It's a puzzle with too many pieces that don't quite fit, or perhaps we're just trying to assemble it upside down. You're still there, in that hushed, imaginary space, gazing at the curious pages of the Voynich manuscript. Let's take a wander, page by page, through its distinct sections, because this isn't just a block of unreadable text. It's a veritable gallery of the bizarre and the beautiful. The manuscript is broadly divided by scholars into several main parts based on the nature of its illustrations, each more puzzling than the last. First, you encounter what's commonly called the herbal section. Page after page features drawings of plants, but these aren't your garden variety daisies or roses. Each plant is depicted with a striking, almost naive clarity, yet they are stubbornly unidentifiable. Some have roots that look like tiny, intertwined creatures. Others have leaves patterned with eyes, and still others bloom with flowers that seem to defy botanical logic. It's like Doctor Seuss decided to write a medieval herbal. You can almost imagine a 15th century botanist flipping through this, muttering, "Right, this one's called the whispering snake root of perpetual confusion. Good for, well, it probably cures something, or causes it. 50-50. Each plant is accompanied by paragraphs of that flowing, inscrutable script, presumably describing its properties, but without a key, it's as helpful as a chocolate teapot. Then you drift into the astronomical or astrological section. Here you find circular diagrams, suns and moons with human-like faces, a common motif in medieval art, to be fair, and intricate patterns of stars or star-like objects. There are charts that look like zodiacs, but the symbols are again unique to the manuscript. Some pages fold out to reveal even more complex cosmic wheels, filled with tiny figures and more of that maddeningly elegant script. It's as if someone was charting a universe that operates on entirely different principles from our own, or perhaps they just had a very unique way of drawing a horoscope. Your stars today indicate a high chance of encountering a plant with eyeballs. Avoid salads. Following this, you stumble into the balneological section, which is perhaps the most famous and perplexing. These pages are filled with drawings of small, naked female figures, often with rounded bellies, bathing in or connected by elaborate networks of green or blue pools and tubes. Some of these structures look like fantastical plumbing systems or even internal organs. The figures are stylized, almost doll-like, and their activities are enigmatic. Are they performing some kind of ritual? Is it a medical treatise on hydrotherapy or women's health, or is it purely symbolic? The imagery is so strange and unprecedented that it fuels some of the wildest theories. It's like stumbling upon a medieval spa day designed by Salvador Dali. There's also a section with what appear to be pharmaceutical illustrations, arrays of small jars and containers, or labeled drawings of plant parts like roots and leaves, again accompanied by the script. It feels more practical, like an apothecary's guide, but to what and for whom remains a total mystery. And finally, the manuscript ends with a long section of dense, unillustrated text, often called the recipes or stars section, consisting of many short paragraphs, each marked with a star-like or flower-like bullet point. This is where the linguistic challenge becomes most acute, with no images to even hint at the subject matter. A mainstream historical fact regarding early attempts to understand the manuscript comes from a letter found tucked inside it when Voynich acquired it. This letter, dated 1665 or possibly 1666, was from Johannes Marcus Marci, a rector of Prague University, to Athanasius Kircher, a renowned Jesuit scholar in Rome. Marci explained that the book had once belonged to Emperor Rudolf II of Prague, our old alchemist-loving friend from the previous story, who had supposedly purchased it for 600 gold ducats, a princely sum, believing it to be the work of the 13th century English friar and scholar Roger Bacon. Marci was sending the book to Kircher, a famous polymath and would-be decipherer of Egyptian hieroglyphs, though his attempts were largely imaginative, hoping he could crack its code. Kircher, alas, seems to have failed, and the book apparently languished in the Jesuit archives until Voynich's arrival. This letter is crucial as it provides the earliest confirmed provenance for the manuscript. Now for a weird detail that has sparked endless speculation. Within the botanical drawings, some researchers have pointed out resemblances, however faint or distorted, to New World plants like sunflowers or peppers. This is highly anachronistic for a manuscript dated to the early 15th century, well before Columbus's voyages. These identifications are very controversial and often rely on a lot of squinting and wishful thinking. If you tilt your head and ignore most of the features, that sort of looks like a jalapeno, right? But it's these little visual hooks that lead to theories of pre-Columbian transatlantic contact, or suggest the illustrator had access to incredibly rare, exotic specimens, or perhaps was just incredibly imaginative. The possible cultural origin of the manuscript, based on its artistic style and other subtle clues, remains a hotbed of scholarly debate. While the vellum and inks are broadly consistent with European production of the early 15th century, the style of the drawings, particularly the plants and the figures, doesn't neatly fit into any known European artistic tradition of that period. Some have suggested northern Italy as a possible origin, due to certain stylistic similarities with manuscripts from that region, or perhaps somewhere in Central Europe, given its connection to Rudolf II's Prague. Others have noted superficial resemblances to Islamic or even East Asian art, though these are generally considered less likely by mainstream scholars. Could it be the work of a unique, isolated artist, or someone from a culture whose artistic records are largely lost? Or is its strangeness precisely because it's a deliberate fabrication designed to look exotic and unplaceable? The manuscript keeps its passport well hidden, adding another layer to its tantalizing silence. You're still there, lost in the visual labyrinth of the Voynich manuscript. We've wandered through its strange gardens and peculiar bathhouses, but hovering over every illustration, every flourish, is the script itself, the silent, elegant, and utterly baffling Voynich. It's a language, or perhaps a code, that has resisted every attempt at comprehension for over a century of intense study. Imagine receiving a text message written entirely in emojis you've never seen before, but it's not just one message, it's a whole book. That's the kind of frustration generations of researchers have faced. When Wilfred Voynich first publicized his acquisition in the early 20th century, it caused an immediate sensation among scholars, cryptographers, and amateur sleuths. The challenge was irresistible. Here was a substantial body of text, clearly written with intent and structure, yet utterly opaque. Initial attempts at decipherment were filled with an almost feverish optimism. Surely, with the advances in linguistics and cryptography, especially those spurred by World War I, someone would crack it. Many tried, many failed. It's like the ultimate linguistic Sudoku puzzle, but no one is even sure what the numbers are supposed to be. A mainstream historical fact that underpins the entire challenge is the complete lack of any key or bilingual text, no Rosetta Stone for Voynich. With ancient languages like Egyptian hieroglyphs, the Rosetta Stone provided parallel texts in known languages, offering a crucial entry point. The Voynich manuscript offers no such courtesy. It stands alone, a linguistic orphan, giving up no easy clues to its parentage or meaning. Every theory has to be built from the internal patterns of the script itself, or from tenuous connections to the equally baffling illustrations. This lack of a clear starting point led to some wonderfully weird and outlandish early theories about the manuscript's language and meaning. Beyond the Roger Bacon theory, some suggested it was a lost language of a forgotten people, perhaps the Cathars, or even a communication from an alien civilization, because when all else fails, aliens is always a popular go-to explanation for the inexplicable. Others proposed it was the work of a child prodigy, a divinely inspired prophet, or even a very clever group of pranksters from the Renaissance with an awful lot of time on their hands. Hey Leonardo, want to mess with future historians? I've got this great idea for some crazy plants. And this, of course, leads directly to one of the most fundamental scholarly debates surrounding the manuscript. Is Voynich a genuine, unknown natural language? Is it an existing language that has been elaborately enciphered or encoded? Or is it artful, meaningless gibberish, cleverly constructed to mimic the statistical properties of real language? A sophisticated hoax designed to look like a profound secret? Each of these possibilities has its staunch defenders and detractors. Some linguists point to statistical patterns in word frequency and distribution that resemble those found in real languages, suggesting an underlying grammatical structure. Cryptographers have tried countless ciphers, from simple substitution to complex polyalphabetic systems, with no verifiable success. And the hoax theory, while perhaps the most deflating, can't be easily dismissed given the potential rewards for creating such a convincing enigma in an era fascinated by secrets and ancient wisdom. So you see, the Voynich manuscript isn't just a book. It's a mirror reflecting our own desire to find meaning, to solve puzzles, and perhaps to believe in the existence of hidden knowledge. It's a silent challenge whispered across 6 centuries, and as you stand on the threshold of its deeper mysteries, you can feel the pull of that challenge, the quiet invitation to try and understand what no one else has. All right, you've had your first proper encounter with the Voynich manuscript, felt the strange allure of its unreadable script and bizarre illustrations. The initial shock of its utter strangeness has perhaps settled into a quiet curiosity. Now let's pull up a chair in the imaginary archives of cryptographic history, because the story of the Voynich manuscript in the 20th and 21st centuries is largely the story of the people who tried to break its code. It's a tale of brilliant minds, dogged persistence, and more than a few intellectual rabbit holes. Once Wilfrid Voynich brought the manuscript into the public eye in 1912, and especially after he shared photostatic copies with interested researchers, the race was on. The early 20th century was a fertile time for cryptography. World War I had spurred incredible advances in code making and code breaking, and there was a general sense that any cipher, given enough effort by clever people, could eventually be cracked. The Voynich manuscript, however, was about to prove itself a uniquely stubborn opponent. One of the first notable figures to take a serious crack at it was William Romain Newbold, a professor of philosophy at the University of Pennsylvania. In the years following World War I, Newbold devoted himself to the manuscript, and in 1921 he announced he had deciphered parts of it. His theory was complex and, unfortunately, rather fantastical. He believed the text was indeed by Roger Bacon and was written in a kind of Latin shorthand, with the true meaning hidden in microscopic strokes and dots within the individual letters, only visible under high magnification. It was like believing each letter was a tiny QR code for another, secret letter. Newbold's decipherment claimed to reveal that Roger Bacon had understood the use of telescopes and microscopes centuries before their accepted invention, describing observations of spiral nebulae and biological cells. This, of course, would have been a revolutionary historical discovery, if true. For a while, Newbold's solution was hailed as a breakthrough. Imagine the excitement, not only cracking the code, but rewriting scientific history. However, his entire theory hinged on these almost invisible markings. This is a mainstream historical fact. Newbold's micrographic theory was thoroughly debunked in 1931 by John M. Manley, a Chaucer scholar and experienced cryptanalyst. Manley demonstrated that the microscopic strokes Newbold claimed to see were simply cracks and fissures in the ink where it had dried and flaked over the centuries. It was a classic case of pareidolia, seeing patterns in random data. Newbold, sadly, had died in 1926, never knowing his life's great work on the manuscript was based on a misinterpretation. It's a rather tragic footnote, a reminder that even brilliant minds can be led astray by wishful thinking, especially when faced with something as seductive as the Voynich. Now for a weirder detail regarding early attempts. Some researchers, convinced the manuscript held alchemical or magical secrets, tried to apply numerological or Kabbalistic methods to decipher it. This involved assigning numerical values to the Voynich characters, or Voynichese glyphs, as they are sometimes called, and looking for significant sums or relationships, or trying to correlate them with astrological symbols or the Hebrew alphabet. One can only imagine the tedious hours spent adding up imaginary numbers based on squiggles, hoping for a sudden revelation. If I assign 7 to the gallows character and 3 to the bench character, and then multiply by the number of naked ladies on page 75, eureka, it means absolutely nothing. Back to the drawing board. These approaches, while born from a genuine desire to find meaning, often tell us more about the preoccupations of the decipherer than the content of the manuscript itself. The failure of Newbold's theory and other early attempts led to a period of more sober, systematic analysis. Cryptographers began to apply more rigorous statistical methods. This brings us to a significant scholarly debate that emerged and continues in various forms. Are the patterns observed in Voynich-Kaze indicative of a sophisticated cipher, or do they point towards something else entirely, like an artificial language or even a hoax? For instance, the script has certain features that are unusual for natural languages. Some characters appear almost exclusively at the beginning of words, others at the end, and some in the middle. The entropy of the script, a measure of its randomness or predictability, is also a point of contention. Some studies suggest it has a lower entropy than many natural languages, which could imply it's not as complex or information-rich, possibly pointing to a cipher that expands the text, like a nomenclator where common words are replaced by single symbols, but here it might be single letters replaced by multiple symbols, or, more pessimistically, that it's less meaningful than it appears. Is it a clever trick, or is its structure just eluding our current understanding of linguistic systems? It's the kind of debate that keeps cryptographers up at night, staring at frequency tables until their eyes cross. You're still with me in this grand, imaginary library of unsolved mysteries, the ghost of Professor Newbold's well-intentioned but flawed decipherment still lingering in the air. His story serves as a cautionary tale, but the allure of the Voynich manuscript was far too strong to deter others. In fact, the challenge it posed attracted some of the brightest stars in the world of cryptography, most notably the legendary American cryptanalyst William F. Friedman. If anyone could crack it, people thought, it would be him. Friedman, a name synonymous with 20th century code breaking, had an illustrious career. He was instrumental in breaking Japan's purple cipher before World War II and made foundational contributions to the science of cryptography. In the 1940s, after his official work during the war, Friedman and a small informal team of analysts, including his equally brilliant wife, Elizabeth Smith Friedman, herself a pioneering cryptanalyst who had an incredible career deciphering rum runners' codes during Prohibition and Nazi spy rings in South America, turned their formidable skills towards the Voynich manuscript. They worked on it intermittently for years, applying the rigorous techniques they had honed against real-world enemy ciphers. Imagine these titans of code breaking, fresh from unraveling complex state secrets, now puzzling over drawings of naked ladies in green baths and plants that look like they belong on another planet. It must have been quite the change of pace. Well, Elizabeth, this Voynich-Kaze certainly isn't German naval enigma, but it's just as stubborn. A mainstream historical fact from this period is that despite their expertise and dedication, The Friedmans and their team, known as the First Voynich Manuscript Study, Group FSG, ultimately failed to produce a verifiable decipherment. William Friedman, in particular, spent a significant amount of intellectual energy on the problem. He famously concluded that the manuscript was likely an attempt to construct a synthetic or artificial universal language, something that philosophers and linguists had been dreaming about since the Renaissance, a perfectly logical, unambiguous way to express thought. He speculated that the script might be based on some sort of a priori philosophical scheme where symbols represent concepts directly rather than sounds or letters of an existing language. However, even with this hypothesis, he couldn't unlock its meaning. His decades of wrestling with the Voynich led him to a rather melancholic conclusion that it was likely an early and ultimately failed attempt at such a language, or perhaps even a sophisticated hoax. It's said that his inability to crack this one puzzle was one of the few great frustrations of his cryptographic career. Now for a weird, or rather deeply frustrating detail for cryptographers. One of the most baffling features of Voynichese is its adherence to certain statistical properties that look like language, while simultaneously resisting common cryptographic attacks. For example, the word structures are very peculiar. There's a high degree of repetition of certain words or parts of words, yet they don't seem to follow patterns that would emerge from simple substitution or transposition ciphers on a known European language. Standard techniques like frequency analysis, counting how often each symbol appears, which is a key to breaking simple substitution ciphers like Caesar ciphers, don't yield straightforward results. It's as if the text is designed to look like it should be easy to crack, but then throws up a series of linguistic smoke bombs. Imagine a safe that has a very obvious keyhole, but no key ever fits, and then you realize the keyhole might just be painted on. The frustration is immense. Some analysts even tried to see if it was a form of steganography, where the message is hidden in plain sight, perhaps in the lengths of words, the heights of letters, or some other subtle visual cue. But these paths also led to dead ends. This enduring resistance to decipherment, even by giants like Friedman, has continually fueled the scholarly debate about the hoax theory. Could a 15th century individual or a small group have possessed the ingenuity to create such a complex and internally consistent fake? To craft over 200 pages of text that looks so convincingly like a real, albeit unknown language or cipher, complete with unique character shapes, word-like units, and even apparent grammatical patterns? Some argue that creating such a sophisticated hoax without computers or modern linguistic theory would be an almost superhuman feat, perhaps even more impressive than creating a genuine coded message. They point to subtle linguistic laws, like Zipf's law, which describes the frequency distribution of words in natural languages, which Voynichese seems to follow to some extent, suggesting it's not just random scribbling. Others counter that a clever forger, particularly one familiar with different scripts, and perhaps with the concept of ciphers, which were not unknown in the 15th century, might have been able to create a plausible-looking imitation, especially if the goal was to impress a wealthy but perhaps credulous patron. Could it be the medieval equivalent of a perfectly faked moon landing photo designed to dupe the experts of its day? The debate rages on, pitting the ingenuity of a hypothetical forger against the deep patterns that seem to whisper of genuine, if hidden, meaning. You're still journeying with me through the perplexing maze of the Voynich manuscript, and we've seen some of the 20th century's sharpest minds rebound off its impenetrable surface. As we drift from the era of the Friedmans into the later decades of the 20th century and the dawn of the 21st, the toolkit available to would-be decipherers undergoes a radical transformation. The age of computers arrives, and with it, a new wave of hope, and inevitably, new waves of frustration. The advent of powerful personal computers, and crucially, the internet, democratized the study of the Voynich manuscript in an unprecedented way. Suddenly, high-resolution scans of its pages were accessible to anyone with an internet connection, not just a privileged few with access to rare book libraries or expensive photostats. Online forums and mailing lists sprang up, dedicated to dissecting every glyph, every illustration, every statistical anomaly. It was as if a global, volunteer army of codebreakers had been mobilized. Complex algorithms could now perform statistical analyses on the text in minutes, tasks that would have taken human researchers months or even years. Imagine trying to calculate letter frequencies for 240 pages by hand. You'd need a lot of graph paper and an even larger supply of coffee. Computers could search for patterns, test hypothetical ciphers, and compare Voynich to vast databases of known languages with lightning speed. This new computational power, combined with global collaboration, led to a fresh bloom of theories. Some researchers, analyzing the structure of Voynich words, their length, the way characters combine, proposed that it might belong to a specific language family that hadn't been thoroughly considered before. There have been arguments for it being a lost Romance dialect, an East Asian language written in a unique script, or even a Semitic language like Hebrew or Arabic, heavily abbreviated or enciphered. Each theory usually comes with a proposed partial decipherment of a few words, often related to the illustrations. Look, if we assume this squiggle means root and this one means leaf, then this plant section almost makes sense. The problem, as always, is that these small successes rarely extend convincingly to the rest of the manuscript. A mainstream historical fact highlighting this computational era is the work of various academic researchers who have applied sophisticated machine learning and artificial intelligence techniques. For example, in 2016, a team at the University of Alberta used AI to analyze the text, and their algorithms suggested that the underlying language might be Hebrew, enciphered with anagrams, alphagrams to be precise. Another study, using different AI models, pointed towards patterns consistent with an Arabic or other Semitic language. While these studies generate excitement and new avenues for investigation, none have yet produced a widely accepted, verifiable decipherment of any significant portion of the text. The computers can crunch the data and find patterns we might miss, but interpreting what those patterns mean still requires a human leap of intuition, or perhaps just a better algorithm. It's like having a super intelligent parrot that can mimic human speech perfectly, but doesn't actually understand what it's saying. Now for a weird and uniquely internet age detail, the sheer proliferation of amateur theories and decipherments that have appeared online. With global access, you get a much wider range of ideas, some brilliant, some less so. You'll find people claiming the manuscript is a guide to a specific region in Italy, a coded history of a lost Cathar sect, a musical score, a magical grimoire, or even a very elaborate grocery list from an alien civilization. One particularly charming theory that occasionally surfaces is that it's written in a forgotten Eastern European dialect, and that if you just pronounce the letters phonetically according to that dialect, it all makes perfect sense. It rarely does, but bless their optimistic hearts. It's a digital Wild West of Voynich theories out there, a testament to the manuscript's enduring power to ignite the imagination, even if some of those imaginations are clearly running on a different kind of fuel. My uncle's cousin's dog walker once knew a guy who said it looked a bit like. This explosion of online activity and open access leads to a fascinating scholarly debate. Has the internet ultimately helped or hindered the quest to understand the Voynich manuscript? On one hand, it has enabled unprecedented collaboration, data sharing, and the application of diverse analytical tools from around the world. Many eyes on the problem should, in theory, increase the chances of a breakthrough. On the other hand, it has also led to a cacophony of unsubstantiated theories, misinformation, and endless circular arguments that can sometimes drown out more rigorous, scholarly approaches. Is it a case of too many cooks spoiling the broth, or is the collective intelligence slowly, painstakingly, sifting through the noise to find a genuine signal? The manuscript itself remains silent, perhaps enjoying the chaos it continues to create, century after century. It's like the ultimate troll, but in vellum. You're still deep in the digital stacks with me, sifting through the endless theories and computational analyses surrounding the Voynich manuscript. The sheer volume of attempts, especially in the internet age, is staggering. It's like watching a global talent show where everyone thinks they have the one unique skill to unlock the ultimate mystery box, but the box remains stubbornly, enigmatically shut. Despite the lack of a universally accepted breakthrough, there have been several more recent, specific claims of decipherment that have garnered media attention, at least for a while. In 2014, for example, Professor Stephen Bax, a linguist, proposed a tentative partial decipherment of about 10 words by painstakingly matching some Voynichese words to plant names and medieval herbals from the Near East and Asia based on the illustrations. He suggested the manuscript might be written in a Near Eastern or Caucasian language. Another claim came in 2017 from Nicholas Gibbs, a television writer and expert on medieval manuscripts, who argued the Voynich was a women's health manual, largely plagiarized and abbreviated from other known texts, with the script being a form of Latin shorthand. Then, in 2019, Dr. Gerard Cheshire, another linguist, controversially claimed to have deciphered it in a matter of weeks, asserting it was written in Proto-Romance by Dominican nuns for Maria of Castile, Queen of Aragon. Each of these claims, and many others, typically ignite a flurry of excitement, followed by intense scrutiny from other Voynich researchers and linguists, who often point out methodological flaws, inconsistencies, or the inability of the proposed solution to scale beyond a few cherry-picked examples. It's a familiar cycle: hope, headlines, and then a return to the drawing board for most of the community. The core difficulties, of course, remain the same as they were for Wilfred Voynich himself. There's still no bilingual text, no undisputed link to a known language or cipher system. The script is unique, and the illustrations, while seemingly offering clues, are themselves so strange that they might be red herrings. Trying to decipher the text based on the pictures is like trying to understand a foreign film with no subtitles, where all the actors are wearing bizarre costumes and using props you don't recognize. You might get a vague sense of the plot, or you might be completely wrong. This leads us to a mainstream historical fact regarding the rigorous standards any purported decipherment must meet. For the scholarly community to accept a solution, it wouldn't be enough to just offer a plausible translation for a few words or phrases. A successful decipherment would need to consistently translate significant portions of the manuscript, not just isolated bits, reveal a coherent underlying language and grammatical system, explain the relationship between the text and the illustrations in a convincing way, and ideally be independently verifiable by other researchers. So far, no theory has come close to clearing all these hurdles. It's like the Olympics of cryptography. You don't just have to be good at one event, you have to excel across the board. Now for a weird detail that highlights the dedication and sometimes eccentricity of Voynich researchers. You'll find individuals who have devoted decades of their lives, often in almost complete isolation, to their own particular theories. Imagine someone meticulously hand-copying every glyph, creating their own complex charts and concordances, perhaps covering the walls of their study with Voynich pages, convinced they are on the verge of a breakthrough that has eluded everyone else. There's the story of James Child, a cryptographer who, in the mid-20th century, proposed the text was an unrecorded Northern European Germanic language. While his work was more academic than some, it exemplifies the lonely passion the manuscript can inspire. Another niche theory that pops up now and then is that it's not a language at all, but a musical score, with the glyphs representing notes or instructions for some lost form of musical performance. If you play the gallows characters as C sharp and the ladies in tubs as a glissando, this brings us to a crucial scholarly debate. How much weight can we actually give the illustrations when trying to understand the manuscript? Are they a faithful guide to the content of the text, or are they symbolic, misleading, or even completely unrelated in a literal sense? If the manuscript is, for example, an alchemical text, the plants and bathing ladies might be allegorical representations of processes or substances, not literal botany or spa treatments. If it's a hoax, the illustrations might be deliberately designed to look like a known genre of manuscript, like an herbal, to make the fake more convincing while having no real connection to the gibberish text. Or if it's a genuine lost work, perhaps the illustrations are accurate depictions of things unknown to us, and our inability to identify them is part of the problem. Can you trust the pictures, or are they just as big a part of the puzzle as the script itself? It's a fundamental question that shapes every approach to decipherment. And so, the Voynich manuscript continues its silent vigil, a sphinx in book form. It has weathered centuries of scrutiny, from emperors and Jesuit scholars to World War codebreakers and AI algorithms. Yet it holds its secrets close, a testament to its creators' ingenuity, or perhaps just their magnificent, inscrutable weirdness. The lure of understanding it, of finally hearing its voice, is what keeps the quest alive, even as the path seems ever more winding and obscure. All right, you've journeyed with me through the determined, often frustrating efforts of code breakers and linguists as they've grappled with the Voynich manuscript. We've seen brilliant minds apply every tool at their disposal, from quill pens to quantum computers, metaphorically speaking, of course. And yet, the manuscript remains stubbornly silent, its script an unyielding fortress. So what if we've been knocking on the wrong door all along? What if the Voynich isn't a coded message or a lost language waiting to be deciphered, but something else? This is where we delve deeper into one of the most persistent and, for some, most disheartening theories, that the Voynich manuscript is an elaborate, meaningless hoax. You can almost feel a slight chill in our imaginary library as we contemplate this idea. After all the intellectual energy poured into finding meaning, the thought that it might all be an illusion is a sobering one. The hoax theory suggests that the entire manuscript, the elegant script, the bizarre illustrations, the apparent structure, was deliberately created to deceive, to appear as a repository of profound secrets while actually containing nothing but artful gibberish. The primary target of such a hoax in the 15th or 16th century, remembering it was owned by Emperor Rudolph II, who paid a hefty sum for it, would likely have been a wealthy, credulous patron with a known interest in alchemy, astrology, rare herbs, or arcane knowledge. Step right up, Your Majesty. Have I got a mysterious ancient manuscript for you? Genuine, one-of-a-kind, secrets of the universe, only 600 ducats. The arguments for the hoax theory are compelling, if circumstantial. Firstly, there's the manuscript's utter resistance to decipherment by some of the world's best cryptanalysts for over a century. While absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence, the consistent failure is suggestive. Then there are certain statistical properties of the text that some researchers find suspicious. For example, Voynichese words often show a very regular internal structure and a high degree of repetition of certain syllables or character combinations, sometimes more so than would be expected in natural languages or even complex ciphers. It's as if the author had a set of rules or a template for generating plausible-looking but ultimately empty words. It's like a computer algorithm designed to write fake Amazon reviews. They look real, but something's just a little bit off. A mainstream historical fact that lends credence to the possibility of such a sophisticated deception is that the Renaissance and early modern period were indeed rife with forgeries and intellectual hoaxes. For example, the donation of Constantine, a forged Roman imperial decree used for centuries to support papal claims to temporal power, was definitively proven to be a forgery in the 15th century by Lorenzo Valla using linguistic analysis. This demonstrates that both the means, skilled scribes and artists, and the motives, wealth, influence, intellectual bragging rights for creating elaborate textual forgeries existed. Creating a completely unique script and set of illustrations for a hoax would be a step further, but not inconceivable for a particularly audacious and talented individual or group. Now for a weird detail that proponents of the hoax or meaningless text theory often point to: the apparent lack of corrections in the manuscript. In most genuinely handwritten texts from that period, especially working documents or unique compilations, you'd expect to see some errors, crossings out, or amendments as the author or scribe worked. The Voynich script, however, flows almost too perfectly, too smoothly, as if it were copied flawlessly or generated with an effortless, almost automatic quality. Some argue this smoothness could indicate it was written by someone who wasn't actually composing meaningful content, but rather drawing a text, focusing on its aesthetic appearance rather than its semantic content. Or if it was generated according to some algorithm or set of rules, a card and grill method has been proposed where templates are used to generate text. This might also result in a strangely fluent but meaningless output. It's like watching someone write beautiful calligraphy in a language they don't understand. The form is perfect, but the content is absent. This leads to a compelling scholarly debate if we assume for a moment that it is a hoax. What was the primary motivation behind its creation? Was it purely for financial gain, a con job aimed at a wealthy collector like Rudolph II? This is perhaps the most straightforward explanation. Or could there have been other motives? Perhaps it was an intellectual game, a challenge created by a Renaissance polymath to stump their contemporaries and future generations. Imagine a 15th century mischievous genius thinking, I'll create a puzzle so baffling they'll still be arguing about it in the 21st century. Alternatively, could it have been a form of artistic expression, a kind of outsider art or glossolalia, speaking in tongues, or in this case, writing in a non-language, where the act of creating the mysterious script and images was itself the goal, without any intention of conveying a specific, decodable message? The meaning then would lie in the aesthetic experience or the psychological state of the creator, not in any linguistic content. The manuscript remains silent on its motives, leaving us to project our own interpretations onto its enigmatic creator. You're still with me, lingering in the shadowed corners of our imaginary library, where the Voynich manuscript lies open, its secrets still inviolate. We've considered the possibility of it being an elaborate hoax, a silent prank played across centuries. Whether it's a profound cipher, a lost language, or a magnificent piece of trickery, one thing is undeniable: its power to fascinate. The manuscript isn't just an object, it's a phenomenon, a cultural touchstone for the unknown, and it has cultivated a unique, passionate, and sometimes eccentric following. Think about the sheer human effort that has been poured into this enigma. Generations of scholars, amateur sleuths, artists, and dreamers have been drawn into its orbit. Online forums dedicated to the Voynich manuscript are vibrant, teeming with discussions that range from highly technical linguistic analyses to wildly speculative theories. There's a shared sense of quest, a community built around a common obsession with an object that gives back nothing but more questions. It's like a club where the only entry requirement is an insatiable curiosity and a high tolerance for ambiguity. People write music inspired by it, create art based on its strange flora, even write fiction where the Voynich holds the key to some grand conspiracy. It has become a muse for those who love a good mystery, a Rorschach test in vellum. Tell me what you see in the Voynich, and I'll tell you who you are. Why this particular manuscript? There are other unsolved codes, other mysterious artifacts, yet the Voynich seems to hold a special place. Perhaps it's the unique combination of an unreadable script with such vivid, bizarre, and strangely beautiful illustrations. The plants, the naked figures and their strange plumbing, the cosmic diagrams, They offer just enough of a hint of a recognizable world, but one that's been twisted through a dreamlike, almost surreal filter. It feels almost familiar, which makes its ultimate incomprehensibility all the more tantalizing. It's the ultimate intellectual itch that you just can't scratch. It dares you to understand it, and a part of us can't resist a dare, especially one that has stumped so many for so long. A mainstream historical fact regarding its current status is that the original Voynich manuscript, officially catalogued as MS-408, is carefully preserved in the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University. Thanks to Yale, high-resolution digital scans of the entire manuscript are freely available online, allowing anyone in the world to study its pages. This open access has undoubtedly fueled the global fascination and the diverse research efforts from academic consortia applying advanced computational linguistics to lone enthusiasts working with their own unique insights. The Beinecke itself receives countless inquiries and proposed decipherments every year, a testament to the manuscript's enduring pull. They handle these with scholarly grace, acknowledging the effort while holding fast to the rigorous standards required for a genuine breakthrough. Now for a final weird, or rather wonderfully creative detail, the sheer variety of artistic responses to the Voynich. Beyond academic study, people have tried to recreate its spirit. There are artists who have created their own Voynich-inspired botanical drawings of fantastical plants. Musicians have composed scores attempting to translate its visual rhythms into sound. There's even a niche interest in trying to cultivate or cook based on the unidentifiable plants and recipes, which is a brave culinary adventure to say the least. Tonight, darling, we're having the star-faced root casserole with a side of blue water nymph infusion. Don't ask what's in it, just enjoy the mystery. It shows how the manuscript has transcended being just a puzzle and has become a source of creative inspiration in its own right. This brings us to our final, lingering scholarly debate, or perhaps more of a philosophical reflection. What does our enduring obsession with the Voynich manuscript ultimately tell us about ourselves? About our deep-seated need to find patterns and meaning, even in apparent chaos? Does it highlight our discomforts with the truly unknown, our drive to solve every puzzle, to leave no stone unturned, no text unread? Or conversely, does it also reveal a certain romantic attraction to the unknown, a desire for there to still be profound mysteries in a world that often feels overly explained and cataloged? The Voynich allows us to imagine a world of hidden knowledge, of lost wisdom, of secrets still waiting to be unearthed. It's a tangible link to a past that feels more enigmatic, more magical perhaps, than our own data-driven present. As the faint light in our imaginary library begins to dim further, and the image of those cryptic pages starts to soften, the Voynich manuscript remains what it has always been, a beautiful, frustrating, and utterly captivating enigma. It's a silent testament to the limits of our knowledge, but also to the boundless reach of our curiosity. It reminds us that not every question has an answer, and perhaps, just perhaps, some mysteries are more valuable for the questions they inspire than for any solution they might eventually yield. The journey into its pages is a journey into the heart of the unknown, and that, in itself, is a profound experience. And with that, our exploration of the centuries of silent, unsolved mystery that is the Voynich manuscript gently comes to a close. You've peered into its baffling script, wondered at its unearthly illustrations, and walked alongside the generations who have tried to hear its voice. Now it's time to let these images of cryptic symbols and fantastical drawings softly fade. And so, as the curious script and the strange, otherworldly images of the Voynich manuscript begin to gently dissolve from your mind's eye, allow a sense of quietude to settle over you. Let the intricate theories, the determined efforts of cryptographers, and the persistent unanswered questions soften and drift away, like old parchment dust motes settling in a still, sunlit room. There's no need now to puzzle over enigmatic glyphs or ponder the meaning of those fantastical, unearthly plants. All the intellectual searching, the pursuit of patterns in the unreadable, can now recede, becoming a distant, fading echo. Release any lingering thoughts of ciphers or lost languages, and allow the profound mystery of the manuscript to simply be, without the need for a solution, without the need for understanding. It is a mystery that has rested unsolved for centuries, and it can continue to rest peacefully as you too prepare for your own deep and restful slumber. Feel the gentle pull of relaxation as it moves through you, loosening any tension, soothing any weariness. Each breath can carry you further into a state of calm, a soft and welcoming space where the puzzles of the waking world have no claim. The images of bathing figures and celestial charts grow dimmer, more translucent, until they are merely faint impressions, like dreams already half forgotten upon waking. There is only the peaceful rhythm of your breathing now, the comforting stillness around you, and the gentle embrace of the approaching night. Allow your mind to become clear and quiet, a tranquil pool reflecting nothing but the soft darkness. You are drifting now, easily and effortlessly, towards a place of deep rest and serene dreams. Good night.